Welcome everybody to this situational briefing from the Miriam Institute. There's much going on. President Donald Trump has spoken to the effect that there are serious negotiations to bring about a close to this war. Israel has had significant impacts within the homeland, impacts that I would say throw off kilter people's assessment of just how successful the military campaign is against Iran, and also the defensive measures that the state of Israel continues to undertake on the home front. And of course, there is much to discuss, and I'm delighted to be joined, as ever, by our in-house analyst here at the Miriam Institute, Yaakov Lappin. Yaakov, thank you very much for being with me. Let's get right to it. Give us, please, if you would, a brief military overview of the progress thus far and to this point inside Iran.
Benjamin, it's always great to be with you. And look, when we're talking about a progress status update, we have to look at families of targets, or you can call them families of capabilities, core capabilities that are being systematically chosen and struck by both Israel and the United States. Naturally, I'm going to be focusing more on the Israeli campaign because I'm just a lot more exposed to the day-to-day data from the Israeli defense establishment. But of course, CENTCOM is putting its own data out there, and it's also extremely important. And it roughly translates to 50-50 in terms of the workload here, in terms of the number of strikes being hit, the number of munitions being fired. And every single day, we have hundreds and hundreds of aircraft from both Israel and the American strike carrier groups and the bases taking off and dropping their munitions. Their full munition load is being dropped on Iranian targets. That's the background to everything I'm saying. Every single day for the past 3 weeks, this has been the reality. So I think that you can look at probably four main families of targets when you're talking about the Israeli campaign. The first is the missile program. The missile program is, as we've discussed before, the trigger for this war, identified as its own existential threat. Iran wanted to create 8,000 of these, to serially mass produce 8,000 missiles by next year, which would have formed an existential threat even without a nuclear program. So on the eve of this war, the Iranians had 2,500 missiles. That means that they made 1,000 missiles since June of last year. And now what we know for a fact, and these percentages are probably a little bit out of date by now because I received them a number of days ago, but at least 70% of their missile launchers have been destroyed or neutralized. 70% of the missile storage facilities have been destroyed, and the big majority of the missile production industrial base has been destroyed. Those are the three main components of the Iranian missile program. It's their ability to launch, it's the storage, and it's the production. All three of those, the majority of them, are gone. They're no longer operational. They're at various levels of destruction. And what we have left is a sort of remnant firing capability, because the Iranians have dispersed primarily mobile missile launchers, trucks, kind of look like civilian trucks from the air, in the mountains of Iran. This is a huge country. We know that it's bigger than France, Britain, Germany, and Spain put together. This is an enormous country, and they don't need a lot of missiles to keep this going. So the volley, the quantity of missiles that the Iranians have been firing has gone down by 90% since the first 48 hours of this war, but the frequency has remained fairly persistent. I'm talking about less than 20 missiles. Sometimes it's a lot less than that per day. In the first 48 hours, they were firing dozens and dozens of missiles, 90% drop. So that's more or less the situation with the missile program. And what the Iranians are trying to do is to prove that they're still in this fight by taking the attention onto the Israeli home front, by sending millions of people into shelters, by causing damage and injuries and targeting civilians. They're actually, amongst other things, trying to hide the fact that their missile program has been severely damaged, because it's a deceptive sort of picture. Hey, they're still in this fight. They're still firing. Why are we still taking cover? This is not the real reflection of their missile capability. The nuclear program is a less, I would say, prioritized family of targets in this war, because most of the Iranian nuclear capabilities were destroyed in the June 2025 war. The uranium enrichment sites at Natanz, Fordow, Isfahan, and various satellite sites have been destroyed. Now, in this war, what we have is strikes on secret facilities that the Iranians had set up in the interim period between these two wars to try and continue their nuclear program. Even though they can't enrich uranium right now in an industrial way, they were still working on various components of their nuclear weapons program. A weaponization group is the group of scientists and engineers. That's what they're called in the intelligence community, and they were active. They have been struck systematically, but it's a less prioritized and far fewer numbers of targets compared to the missile program. If the first war was about the nuclear program, this war is about missiles in terms of priorities. The third category of targets I would class as the leadership, the entire Iranian political and military leadership, from Ayatollah Khamenei, from the commander of the IRGC, from the chief of staff, there, and down, all the way down to terrorists that were activating Hezbollah, the Quds Force, the IRGC intermediate commanders, commanding control, bases. Thousands of these targets have been struck. So the Iranian leadership is being targeted for systematic elimination. And it's really quite remarkable the level of disruption that these attacks have caused to Iran's ability to communicate with itself, to even have a situation picture, to gather intelligence. Their command and control very severely disrupted. And the fourth category of targets I would classify as the internal security or the besiege capability. This is all about trying to destabilize the Iranian regime. Israel has made no secret that it wants to see this regime fall. This regime is committed to Israel's destruction, and it's completely legitimate. And the way to increase the odds that this regime might fall is by targeting the very repressive, murderous internal repression system, which is called the Besiege and the police. These are the killers that murdered 35,000 mostly unarmed Iranians back in January. Many of their bases have been hit in western Iran, in central Iran, in areas where there's a hope that populations will see that this force has been weakened, and maybe that will catalyze some sort of uprising in the future. We really don't know, but they're being targeted systematically. They've been weakened. Their commander has been killed, deputy commander. Then they set up headquarters in sports stadiums and in tents to try and get out of the sights of the Israeli intelligence community. That hasn't helped them. They're being hunted down in those alternative tent-like structures as well. And I think just the fact that you have the IRGC, you have the Besiege, these were the rulers of Iran, turning into hunted entities in their own country, that in itself, I think, is going to reverberate. It's going to have a powerful, I think, weakening message for this regime going forward. So I've given you a very brief overview, Benjamin, but I hope that's one that is useful for our viewers in terms of understanding the main four categories. There are other categories that we can talk about, but I want to hand the stage back to you.
So, yeah, of course, Yaakov, as always, a very useful overview. You've spoken about the progress thus far with regard to the various families of target banks, if I can borrow your parlance. And there is great progress, and it's very clear that we're massively and significantly and effectively downgrading the capabilities on the ballistic missile front of the Iranians, as you said. It makes good sense that the pursuit of the destruction of Iran's nuclear weapons capability would be a second-order priority because it's not quite as acute. And ultimately, much of this comes down to the ongoing hunt for the 450 kilos of the 60% uranium that the Iranians boasted, of course, that they had when Special Envoy Witkoff and Jared Kushner were sitting opposite them at the negotiating table. That amount, incidentally, is assumed to be sufficient for the refining and the creating of 11 nuclear weapons. Of course, we now see that the Iranians would absolutely target Israel with such weapons, and indeed its neighbors, and indeed American and Western assets arrayed throughout the Middle East more locally. And we all know that the besiege and the infrastructure is indeed being targeted, resulting in the besiege taking to the forests and to the schools, and really, as you mentioned, becoming an organization that's somewhat in disarray. So all of that's very positive, but it doesn't gel at all, and I say lamentably, with the information. And that's a very significant additional front in this war. I'm referring to the information war. And it saddens me that in Israel, we see time and again the language of defeatism, the language of supplication and of surrender. The phrases that are bandied about range from a quagmire, something that comes obviously from the Vietnam War, this idea that the United States, the moment it pulls the trigger or takes aim at any particular target, that is the first step into an inevitable quagmire, a war from which they cannot extricate themselves. That's completely absurd in my estimation, given that we are just a few short weeks into this campaign against a deeply entrenched regime that has been building the capabilities for decades in some cases, and that is very clear about its ideology. Its ideology is to spread its religious fervor throughout the Middle East, to take down the state of Israel, to take down the United States, and to take down Western civilization as we know it. Such a regime is not going to roll over at the first point of contact. I don't accept that war planners in the United States of America, and certainly not in the States of Israel, assumed that this would all be speng v'gamarnu, one and done, essentially. But I am hearing time and again from Israeli commentators and certainly the international commentariat that this is a disaster, that we can see that the United States-Israel coalition is resolutely failing. And I think that much more needs to be done to counter that, such as, for example, the outlining of the basic facts, the essential facts that you just presented to us here. Now, it seems that those who are speaking the language of defeatism are claiming something of a victory as a result of the idea that President Trump is now saying that America is in the midst of negotiations with Iran. And I want to talk about that with you because, in my opinion, despite Prime Minister Netanyahu yesterday giving a public statement about those mooted negotiations, incidentally, these are negotiations that the Iranians have denied are actually taking place, Prime Minister Netanyahu has said that the terms that President Trump has identified for negotiations would keep intact and preserve Israel's essential security priorities. And I don't see how that can possibly be the case. We now know that the Iranians are in possession of this enriched material. Now, one of the terms of any negotiation would be the shipping out of that material, but we also know that the Iranians are wont to lie. We are also aware of the fact that the Iranians, despite being massively downgraded, as you said, can continue to fire. Israelis are still moving from their shelters back to their shelters numerous times every single day and every single night. I don't know that there's been an exception since this war began. So we know that the Iranians are expert at drip feeding terror onto our people and into our society. And we also see that the Iranian people, and this is something that I was always skeptical about and remain a skeptic on, I'll be happy to be proven wrong, but the Iranian people are not taking to the street. Now, some people fail to realize that when there are bombs flying all over the place, you're somewhat loath to go out to the street and start demonstrating. If people are continuing to misunderstand why that's so very complex, think about Israelis. Israelis, as a result of the responsibility taken by our government, we are the beneficiaries of what's called passive defense, where many homes have bomb shelters built within them as secure, reinforced rooms against the very threats that we're facing now. And many outside facilities double up as or are host to additional bomb shelters. So, for example, if people have traveled to southern Israel, they'll know that many of the bus stops around the city of Sderot are also bomb shelters. They will know that if they've been to a kenyon, a mall in Israel, every mall, every public place and space has a public shelter somewhere proximate to it. But when Israelis go out, and I would say we're on the offensive side of this conflict, we do go out, but we stay proximate to where a shelter is in most cases. The Iranian people have no such shelter because their regime has had no interest in building up the passive defense that preserves the lives of Israelis over there in Iran to preserve the lives of Iranians. So they're not taking to the streets. So given that we haven't eliminated completely the ballistic missile threat, that we haven't seen the shipping out, and I don't believe we can trust that the Iranians will ship out all of their uranium in the event of any deal, And given, of course, that the people are not currently taking to the streets, how can it possibly be that this would be an apt moment to bring about an end to this conflict?
So, look, first of all, I think we have to accept that the ending of this conflict is a decision that is a large unknown. The factors that will shape it, I think, are first and foremost being formed in Washington. And President Trump is, in my view, the dominant decision maker for the timing by virtue of his being the president of the United States. The United States is the senior partner in this coalition. Not in terms of military effort. Again, it's 50-50. We're talking about, well over 15,000 targets hit by both of them, 50-50. But in terms of the decision to enter it and the decision to lead its, I would say, duration, I think President Trump is the more dominant decision maker here in this coalition. So the question is, what is going to be forming his decision? And here, I think, we can only speculate. On the one hand, there are still many targets left, no question about it. On the other hand, if we're going to get into the mind of President Trump, Benjamin, which is in many ways a different conversation, and some would say a very difficult one, I think we can't avoid, mapping it out like any other strategic attempt to map out the various dominant factors. What is President Trump trying to achieve here? That's the big question. I think, and by the way, I've heard many different explanations for this. My view is that President Trump was presented with very real and critical and disturbing intelligence about Iran's intentions, its capabilities, its nuclear and missile programs, its extension of the missile program in a way that was on the way to threatening the U.S. homeland with ICBMs. So we saw what they fired at Diego Garcia, 4,000-kilometer missiles. And he instinctively understood that this has to be stopped now. He understood it very quickly. And as soon as that decision crystallized in his mind, and he also saw that Israel was on the way to attacking, Israel would have attacked, in my view, whether the United States would have joined it or not. No question in my mind that Israel was on its way to attack it. Once he saw all of these factors in play, he understood, and I think he deserves a lot of credit for this, because it's not a given that the United States has got to step in and be a part of this war effort. First and foremost, to bring down the threats, the major threats that this regime presents. But he's also got other things pulling him in the other direction. And I think you're probably more well-versed in those factors as well. Things such as promises that he's made about no long Middle Eastern wars, no major ground operations, many of the things that he has promised his base, and which he has kept to. And we also have energy prices and economic factors, et cetera. Now, I think that those are playing a factor in his decision making. They're not dominant. I don't know how to prioritize or rank these factors, but I think they're all there. So when he looks at the big picture, I think he wants to bring this regime to its knees, fundamentally change the threat landscape, and then disengage when he thinks it's possible, based on the belief that he has made the Middle East and the world a safer place. I think that's more or less what's guiding him. And I think that those are sound considerations, Benjamin. On the whole, these are sound considerations. So I don't know when President Trump wants to end this war, but what I do suggest, and the framework that I suggested for looking at this war, is look at it as a process. I think if we start our examination from October 7th and read today, what we will see is a systematic and clear weakening of the entire jihadist Iranian axis. Every member of this axis has been degraded, from Iran to Hamas to Hezbollah. They're continually being degraded as we speak. It's happening in phases. It's not happening in one fell swoop. But whichever criteria you use to examine their status in the region, their ability to act on their ideology, to project power, you can see that their ability to do that is getting less and less with every stage of this multi-stage conflict. And so I think that the most important thing in my mind is that Israel is not facing existential threats, that Israel will act, and if this regime survives, that it will be determined to preserve these gains. And that means that if the regime survives, and if any intelligence comes in that they're rebuilding any of these capabilities, Israel, and in my belief, will not wait. It will not wait a single week before sending its jets back east to make sure that no mass missile production is happening, no nuclear work or no proxy rebuilding is happening. And I think that, if this regime is kept weak, paralyzed, unable to project power beyond its borders because its capabilities are never allowed to rebuild, if it can be kept in that state until it does collapse, and we have to be hopeful that one day, and hopefully sooner rather than later, it will collapse, then I personally believe, and I don't know if you agree with me or not, but I personally believe that that is a viable strategy. If you keep your enemy in a situation where it is unable to threaten you existentially, and then the enemy ends up collapsing because at some point the Iranian people will find the ability, the arms, the courage, whatever you want to call it. They've already been, I think, very courageous, and they've been slaughtered for it. But if the regime can be kept at a low grade threat level until it does collapse, then that is a alternative strategy to immediate collapse, which I personally think is a viable strategy for Israel to pursue. And it rests on the new Israel. It rests on the idea that Israel in the post-October 7th world does not wait, does not contain, does not deter. When it identifies threatening capabilities, it removes them when it identifies them. So I hope the regime falls tomorrow, Benjamin, just to be clear. And I'm in favor of doing everything that we can possibly do. And by the way, maybe not everything is being done to collapse the regime. Maybe the export of oil and energy should be hit instead of leaving it there as a bargaining chip. Maybe that should be hit now. Or maybe it's a mistake to leave it in place. Maybe not everything is being done. But my point is that even if we're unable to bring this regime to collapse now, that doesn't mean that it will not collapse in the medium-term future. So I think we need to be patient and work systematically to keep this threat under control until it does collapse.
So I agree with much of what you've said, but I think there's a liability in your argument. And the liability that I see in the argument is as follows. You've expressed that the end will come at the time of President Trump's choosing for this campaign in its current form, just to be clear. And
Correct.
then expressed that going forward, Israel, based on the post-October 7th doctrine, which is that we hit enemies and threats as and when they emerge, unbelievable that that wasn't always our doctrine, incidentally, but it seems that that was the case, that we were leaning towards notions, not leaning towards, leaning into notions of deterrence, false notions, unfounded notions. But here's the problem that I see in what you're suggesting, Yaakov. This demonstrates that the state of Israel is able to marshal incredible capabilities in support of the United States of America. And it also demonstrates that the United States of America is able to achieve great things in support of aims that cohere with the state of Israel in this case. But implicit within that is that neither country could undertake this operation independently, in my view. I think that they need one another. President Trump has expressed that he would like to see the assistance of other nations in addition to the States of Israel, though Israel has been a model ally, as Secretary of War Hegseth has spoken to. So if neither country can do this, independent of anybody else, including the State of Israel, despite all of our capabilities and all of our determination and the nature of the existential threat that we face from the Iranians, given that you believe that the end to this conflict will come at the whim of a president, I'm very concerned when you look at the longer term, and I'm not talking about the far distance, I'm talking about as early as 2028 when there's a changing of the guard in the White House. I am not at all convinced that the next president of the United States of America will agree to or grant free hand and even the munitions and capabilities to Israel to at any time of our choosing fly over to Tehran and take out whatever threat we deem is emerging. And that's why the politics here is very, very important. I think that this entire campaign took the unique combination of a President Donald Trump and a Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, that they both be in situ at the same time and that they both see things in an aligned fashion with some differences around the margins, based on the idea that Iran is an existential threat to the State of Israel and indeed an ongoing threat to the West and an emerging threat to the United States of America and certainly its assets and its allies in the region. The next president of the United States, in my view, is not at all guaranteed to be of that perspective and of that doctrine. And we've already had, in the previous administration under President Joe Biden, a willingness demonstrated by an American president to withhold and withdraw vital munitions for the state of Israel, even in the midst of a hot seven-front kinetic war where we were literally fighting for our survival. And so it's for that reason, Yaakov, that I'm actually disappointed that I'm hearing, and it could all be an exercise in deliberate misinformation, which again, President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu have proven themselves expert at propagating, and I salute them for having done so. Before the 12-day war, for example, would be an excellent example of them doing that. But when I hear Prime Minister Netanyahu beginning to make the case, if we take it on its face, that an end to the war now would safeguard Israel's vital security considerations, I don't think that that's true at all. I don't think that there's any evidence that that would be the case. And I express and I reiterate what Prime Minister Netanyahu so ably communicated, namely, we had to go after the ballistic missile program because if allowed to go unchecked, that program can cause damage that is tantamount to a nuclear strike or series of nuclear strikes on the homeland in the state of Israel. And therefore, I wouldn't rest at ease or rest assured if Iran was to ship out its nuclear fissile material, that we are therefore the beneficiaries of our security being guaranteed in a ceasefire arrangement, given the fact that not all the ballistic missile programs have been taken out, given the fact that there is something of a regime intact, and given the fact that there isn't a sea change within Iran. So I just wanted to put a counterpoint. I know that you have to go. I want to ask you about a different front, if I may. I know you and I, of course, could go back and forth on this for vast periods of time.
Your concerns are completely sound, and I have a lot to say. And maybe next time, Benjamin, I'll be able to.
Definitely.
But totally sound and realistic concern.
Thank you. So I appreciate that from you, and I want to just spend 1 minute, 2 minutes, if you have. Let's do it as briefly as you're able. The second priority front, that it has been determined that it is a second priority by Israel, namely the battle against Hezbollah. I remind everybody that if we want to stop the Iranian terror proxy regime that is arrayed, including around our borders, they're not exclusively, inside Gaza with Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and of course with Hezbollah, if we want to stop that terror proxy regime, we have to continue to hit the headquarters, which is over there in Tehran. But Israel is in the midst of a battle with Hezbollah. We haven't brought about an end to their fire across our border, despite the absurd notion that there was some sort of durable, emphasis on the word durable, ceasefire at play. How long do you think that Israel will continue to push back against Hezbollah, to drive everywhere, every Hezbollah operative, terror operative north of the Litani River? And do you agree with me that that battle has to and will persist, even if there is a ceasefire and end of conflict declared directly with Iran?
Yes. First of all, I apologize in advance. I only have 60 seconds, so I'm gonna cram everything. Address everything.
Make every word.
I agree with you that the Lebanese arena is likely to go on significantly longer than the Iranian arena. We are the only decision maker in this part of the war, even though it's all part of one war. Iran in Lebanon is Hezbollah, and that's what we're fighting against there, their proxy. So how long will it go on for? Of course, it's very hard to guess, but I would say that Israel right now is going for a fundamental and irreversible transformation of the southern Lebanese threat landscape. Not only is Hezbollah being targeted systematically, its infrastructure, the villages, but also its entire ecosystem. Hundreds of thousands of Shiites who are the base of Hezbollah have left southern Lebanon. They're not there, Benjamin. The villages are empty. And that is dramatic. Now, Israel is saying they're not coming back until the threat is lifted. There are many ways to interpret that, but I have never heard Israel say that before about this population, because we understand that when they come back, they bring with them Hezbollah terrorists. We've also got a Lebanese government, which, although it's militarily weak, just ordered the Iranian ambassador to leave. They're blaming Iran and Hezbollah for this war. This is a new voice that's coming out of Beirut, and it's politically damaging for Hezbollah's legitimacy. So things are changing. There's something that is changing fundamentally in Lebanon. I would urge everybody to watch this space, because I don't think history is repeating itself, even though we've got a new security zone, a new buffer zone that does remind some people of what happened. But the civilians that were used by Hezbollah to set up an entire terror infrastructure are gone. Unfortunately, I'm being told that I have to head downstairs. So,
No problem.
Benjamin,
Yaakov,
my apologies.
no problem. I'll wrap the show. Thank you very much for being with us. And also
Thank
to
you.
our listeners, thank you for listening to our situational briefing. We look forward to next time. Remember to subscribe and to leave a comment at wherever it is that you download your podcasts from. And be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you are the recipient of any and all new footage and coverage as and when we publish it. Thank you very much. And from here at the Miriam Institute, it's over and out for now.